If we've not met before, my name's Tim, and this afternoon we are looking at a bit of a one-off subject because we're not in a sermon series at the moment, and the last 2 weeks Pete Hughes has been teaching about spiritual gifts, particularly prophecy and then tongues. And that's the kind of bit that you really come to church for, right? Because you could do most of this without God. You could lay out chairs. You could even have the coffee. You can have the nice chatty bit. None of that sort of distinctly relies totally on God. But when you look at the subjects of prophecy and tongues, without God, it's kind of a little bit, of an odd thing to do. But with God, it's kind of fascinating as we're drawn to this place of dependence and intimacy with him as he gifts his church. And it's led us to this quite pure space. And in one sense, I want to follow on from that space. How do we rely on God in a moment like this? And the purpose of this time, it might feel slightly different from other sermons you've heard at KXC. I'm not going to zone in on the minutiae of our lives. We're not going to look at the deeply personal that sometimes we do. We're going to look at the macro, the big picture. I'm going to ask us to zoom out and to look at two things this afternoon. Firstly, something fundamental about the church. Something fundamental that the New Testament reveals to the church. And then secondly, what does that mean for times like these with the headlines that you will have read this week? And let me just tell you, those two things will feel a little bit like pineapple on pizza. And by that, I mean it is going to feel a bit of a clash. Let me tell you now, the moment will come, I can guarantee it, having done this sermon this morning, when this sermon changes gear to the present, and it's going to feel like, wow. But I happen to love pineapple on pizza. I don't know about you. I think it's a tropical heaven. Yeah, a few lovers in the room. It is a tropical heaven. So hopefully it won't be all bad. But as we contend with what the scriptures reveal, something fundamental about the church, and then what that means for times like this, it is going to feel a bit like a clash. So there's some warning for you. The church isn't a neutral subject for me, by no means. It's biographical, it's fundamental, because I grew up in a house where my dad was a vicar, and so this isn't a neutral topic for me. This is something that's deeply personal. I've never not had a relationship with the church. Some people say, like, I'm sensitive to loud noises, or I'm very sensitive to garlic, or, whatever. I'm sensitive to church. It doesn't mean nothing. It means something deeply personal to me. I've never been able to escape church, even when I've tried my hardest. There was a point when I said, I hate the church. And someone asked me, well, what do you hate? And I said, well, the church should be a place about Jesus, not about the obsession with celebrity. The church should be a place where people's needs are met, not where leaders are elevated. The church should be a place where there's purity and praise, not an occupation with celebrity. And I went on and on and on and on and on. And they said, wow, that sounds like an amazing vision for a church if you consider church leadership. Church isn't neutral for me. I'm sensitive to it. And there was a time when I was about to be ordained as an Anglican priest, when I was wrestling with all the ills of the institutional church, all the things through history that the church has got wrong, and thinking, what am I doing joining this team? And I was praying through the ways in which the church has broken out of boundaries and old times, ancient Christianity in these lands, where the church has broken out of the existing models to do new things. And I found myself contending again and praying for God to do such things in this time. This was back in 2017. And that's when really the foundation of Wildfires Festival. Anyone go to Wildfires this year? Yeah? That's around the time conversations were happening about wildfires, where a group of people got together and said, let's contend together for the next great awakening. And one of the key biblical passages that certainly God was speaking to me about and others at that time was 1 Kings 18. And we're going to read it now, the culminating verses. And this is a chapter and a story you probably know. You would know if you were at the weekend together early this year, because Pete Gregg closed it out with this. And in one sense, it's like a bookmark passage. So I don't apologize for the repetition. It's a passage that for these times and for this church feels significant, that we keep coming back to make sure that we're faithful to what God has said specifically to us. So this is maybe just repetition, but I think necessary repetition. So here is the end of 1 Kings 18. From verse 41, if you have a Bible. The words are on the screen. And Elijah said to Ahab, go, eat and drink, for there is the sound of a heavy rain. So Ahab went off to eat and drink. But Elijah climbed to the top of Carmel, bent down to the ground, put his face between his knees, and then said, go and look towards the sea, he told his servant. And he went up and looked. There is nothing there, he said. 7 times Elijah said, go back. The 7th time the servant reported, a cloud as small as a man's hand is rising from the sea. So Elijah said, go and tell Ahab, hitch up your chariot and go down before the rain stops you. Meanwhile, the sky grew black with clouds. The wind rose. A heavy rainstorm came on and Ahab rode off to Jezreel. The power of the Lord came on Elijah, and tucking his cloak into his belt, he ran ahead of Ahab all the way to Jezreel. The context of this story, these few verses that culminate a long story, the previous chapters, the context of this story is famine. 3.5 years of famine, the land parched, no food for the livestock, nothing to eat, famine and hunger. And within that environmental disaster, there was a political disaster, compromise and treachery at the heart of politics, and a worship disaster, because Israel had rejected God and chosen to worship idols. And a personal disaster for Elijah, who'd been called to be a prophet this time, who spends half the time looking like a Marvel superhero and half the time looking like, a character from a British sitcom, some sort of pathetic middle-aged sort of Basil Fawlty, Ricky Gervais, Alan Partridge, that kind of vibe. Like, he's always like scared and depressed and then suddenly heroic and, jumping backwards and forwards. So there's a personal disaster as well. And then he hears the sound of a heavy rain. Going back 2 weeks ago to what Pete Hughes shared about prophecy. Prophecy is the ability to perceive what God is doing before he does it, to speak into someone's life, divine destiny. And here, Elijah hears the sound of heavy rain before he sees it. And then boldly confronts King Ahab with this news. And that's quite a thing because, the context is famine. They're literally like the absence of food. So to tell the king it's about to end is a seriously punchy move. But then he doesn't just stay with the king. He partners with what he's heard in prayer. He goes up and assumes his position between his knees. It's the position that, to be honest, most of humanity has been born in throughout time and space. Not in the kind of the hospital beds the way they do it now, but this is the position of birthing something. It's also the position of prayer, but thirdly, it's the position of carrying and afraid. And I kind of feel if you get to know Elijah, he's doing all three at the same time. Lord, may this happen, and I pray in faith. And also I'm terrified because I've just told the king it's about to rain and we're in a famine. So can I ask you, servant, I'm too afraid. I'm going to stay down here, stay in the tent. Could you just have a little look and just let me know? Is there a cloud there? Servant goes out. No, in a famine, there's no cloud, there's no rain coming. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Can you do it for a second time? Because you're just popping out and having known there's no cloud there. It goes on the final time. Now, possibly, I suppose you couldn't just look for a 7th time. And then a cloud the size of a man's hand. Then everything changes. The rain falls. The whole nation can now be renewed. The fundamental reality of food is now possible. The end of this long and difficult process, everything changes. And I think this is a prophetic picture of really something we've been going through in this nation. Many years ago now that discern that although it looks like a terrible time for the institution, although it looks like the church is collapsing, there's leadership catastrophe, the statistics are falling off a cliff, it's kind of moment when the God of miracles, the God of resurrection, maybe is stirring something. So why don't we contend again for the next great awakening? Why don't we pray? Because I hear the sound of a heavy rain. I remember the personal moment of when I went to sort of literally vow my life to the church in a weird kind of wedding type ceremony called an ordination. And thinking, what am I doing? I've seen behind the scenes and how this works. Why would I do this? Because I hear the sound of a heavy rain. And arguably, I think where we are right now at this moment is it's as though in the last few years a cloud has appeared on the horizon. And the whole culture seems to have shifted and blown open. And suddenly the topic of Christianity is everywhere. And statistically, the openness to exploring faith has just rocketed off the charts. As Emma just said, 74% of students would love to be invited to church if only we would invite them. Incredible. It's as though the cloud is there and maybe even the first raindrops are starting to fall. But at this moment, This is a critical threshold moment between where we are now and when the rain falls. And we must hold our nerve at this moment. We must hold our nerve. We must not get distracted, but settle for less. We must hold our nerve because the famine is still at play. And everywhere I see this across the culture. My friend is a bishop of South Essex, basically, that area. And in his patch where he's a bishop is the town Epping. And if you cast your mind back to June, you'll remember it was the epicenter of some rioting and some protests. Following a criminal incident, protests started to emerge around the Bell Hotel in Epping. And for a few days at least, and in fact longer, but for a few days, the media turned on this moment. And every politician weighed in on what was happening there. And the conversation and the division that's been happening over things like immigration policy heightened. And suddenly that kind of whole conversation zoned into that one place. And my friend who's a bishop was meeting with the police at that time. And in one conversation, he said, well, I'm your bishop. How can I pray for you? And they said, pray for the rain. Pray for the rain, because rioting always happens in the summer. Have you noticed that? When it's hot, people get a little bit carried away and maybe start drinking beer a little bit earlier. A little cold one at 10 a.m. never helps. And the police say, pray for the rain. Because when the rain falls, people don't want to come and protest. In fact, they talk about PC rain. The police say, well, if PC rain shows up, we'll be okay. It's a picture of what we need to pray for, that the Spirit of God would do something that we couldn't possibly do to fall in our culture at a time of famine. And at a time of genuine crisis, I believe, ideologically in our nation, we need the Spirit to do what we couldn't possibly do by ourselves. And this is going to be, I think, in my deepest conviction, really why I'm stood on this stage and the deepest things in my heart about a subject that's not neutral to me, the church. I believe that in our lifetimes we're stepping into an apostolic moment. And I'm going to explain what that means. So zooming back, this is a picture of a cross, a stone cross. And I stumbled across this earlier in the year, in fact, also in June, the same time as the Bell Hotel riots were happening. And when I stumbled across this, it was kind of by accident, but I knew the history of Christianity in this area, in Kent. So when I saw this this cross, I suddenly remembered this was the site where there was once a great oak tree, where a young man called King Ethelbert met St. Augustine. Now let me zoom out to tell you what happened between and why St. Augustine and King Ethelbert were at this oak. The context is that there'd been Christianity in these lands since really the time of Jesus. Just afterwards, with Roman soldiers, probably the first Christians came to England. And with the Roman occupation of these lands, there was a church. But as the Roman Empire retreated, Christianity got spread to the margins, places like Wales and Scotland, and different tribes from mainland Europe kind of invaded and took over, and there was lots of wars. And then a few centuries later, at the very end of the 6th century, a pope called Gregory called his mate St. Augustine, he wasn't a saint then, I think he was just called Augustine, and said, I want you to go to this land to preach the gospel. I've heard that the pagan tribes are just going crazy and there's war and there's no church there. You need to go and start the church. So St. Augustine gathered a team of 40 other monks and they headed off. They got as far as northern France. And then they started to hear these rumors like, the guys over there are really scary. They kind of cut your heads off. And so they got scared and they literally got to the channel and then turned back and came back to Rome. And the Pope said, amazing! You're back already. You've converted the British Isles. That's such good news. And they said, no, we never went. We got scared. So they said, back you go again. And this time they made it all the way. And they got to Kent. And they are literally knees knocking, thinking these guys are going to cut their heads off. But King Ethelbert, what a name, by the way. King Ethelbert, he'd heard rumors of these people. Said that they believed that their God died on a cross, which was almost unimaginably stupid. Why would a God be executed as a criminal in public? And I heard stories of their healings. And he was scared because he thought, if we just kill these people, what if I'm cursed? What if something bad happens to me? So he said, we'll meet at the big oak tree. And when they met there, something amazing happened. He heard the story of Jesus. And St. Augustine, with probably knees knocking, said the compassionate Jesus had redeemed a world of sin by his own love and opened the kingdom of heaven to all who would believe. And King Ethelbert's heart was softened to this message, not least because he had a wife with a potentially even better name. Her name was Bertha, and Bertha had been praying for him. And he heard, because she'd just become a Christian a few months before, and he heard this message and his heart softened to it. And he said, look, I don't know if what you're saying is true about this Jesus or not, but I'm not going to stop you. So feel free to just go for it. Convert who you want to convert, talk about Jesus. I'll protect you, but I'm just going to wait and see. So they went person to person, house to house, and at first families, and then whole towns converted. 2 years later, they did a baptism in the river. On Christmas Day, a bit cold, 10,000 people. And this is how the established church and the kind of organized church kind of rose from really nothing to quite quickly the whole nation. And so off the back of St. Augustine, that's why we have an Archbishop of Canterbury, because his first church was in Canterbury. This is how it all flowed. And then I was stood here at this cross in June, thinking about the nation, thinking about everything going on, and also aware that there is currently no Archbishop of Canterbury. It's a vacancy, and it's a time of discerning who's next. And I found myself praying for the church in this land, and praying back to the same things I'd prayed back in 2017 of, Lord, I don't always want to be in this. This church thing is crazy. But if I'm in it, please renew us. Take us back to the very source of who you are. And I had the strangest experience where I stood here at this cross to go back in my mind's eye, back to St. Augustine and back before. And rather than to pray for just the revival and the renewal of the systems as they are, rather than just to pray for the great cathedrals and the structures and the money, to pray straight to Jesus for something new, to pray for new wine for this nation, to pray that there will be something coming from the heart of God in the full power and authority of the kingdom of God that's a fresh wave of the church, a clear and a visible picture of Jesus, not encumbered by the past, but empowered by the Spirit. Amen. That's why this is an apostolic moment. Because I feel that what needs to happen is something like another St. Augustine. Because statistically, it's as though there's like a bit of a blank canvas where people's education about and kind of understanding Christianity has gone from being in the 20th century, where it's just like the wallpaper, the religious wallpaper of a nation, to suspicion, hostility, rejection, and now openness. People are wide open. But what are they going to hear? What version of the events are they going to see? Are they going to hear about Jesus as we see him in the scriptures? We have the opportunity to be truly apostolic. So let me explain exactly what that word means. You might have heard there are many disciples, but just a few apostles. In the scriptures, many follow Jesus and are called disciples, which just means learners, but a few are chosen to be apostles. The word just means sent ones. It was a word used in cultures for emissaries or ambassadors. When a military fleet was setting out or a new kind of part of the empire was being set up, you would send an apostle who had the authority of the master, of the king, of the emperor. They had the authority, but also the means to recreate the king's work. The apostle was the person that could set up colonies. The apostle was the person that could set up what we would call now like embassies. The apostle had the full authority and means to establish the king's will, rule, and reign. And so when this word is being used about the early followers of Jesus, it all hinges around one event, the heart of everything, the resurrection. The apostles were those that saw the living Jesus die and then raised to life. They had the authority to establish his rule and reign, because it's by the power of the resurrection that all things will be made new. The apostles were those with the news of the resurrection sent by Jesus to establish the church as outposts of heaven in this world. That's what it is to be apostolic, to be extending the resurrection power of Jesus. And so Paul describes it very succinctly at the beginning of Galatians. I'm an apostle, sent not from men nor by a man, but by Jesus Christ and God the Father who raised him from the dead. An ambassador, an emissary, someone with authority, but not from humanity, from God. And then talking about how the church is built, he describes these functions: the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors, and the teachers. These are almost like 5 flavors that make up the church, with the first one seeming to be about establishing the church and then the development and the growth of the church. That makes sense because the 2 chapters earlier, he said it's built on the church is built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets. These 2 gifts that we've heard about, the prophetic 2 weeks ago, and the gift of apostolate is linked. It's as though the prophetic kind of has discernment on God's ways, and the apostle has authority. So imagine a whole kind of range of doors in front of you. Which one should you pick? Well, it would be a prophet that would help you to discern the right one, and an apostle that would kick it down. Because the apostle has the authority of the death-beating love of God. The authority of the creator and the sustainer and the redeemer of all things, who stepped into history in Jesus and began to set all things right. And the apostle acts to establish the rule and reign of the one true king. This is an apostolic moment because the church needs to be reestablished. Not just old channels renewed, but new channels dug. So think of the church like a plant. This is a lovely looking plant, isn't it? And this plant has roots, a stem, and fruit. Now, if you think about the church as a plant, you think about how it grows, a single seed. If it's the right seed with the right DNA, the right kind of root material, can be planted in a single field and then grows, but not just by addition, it can multiply. So 1 plant can make 3. And then 3 can make 9. And if everything does things by 3s, the maths go beyond me very quickly. And the number gets great. And you can go from 1 seed to a whole field full of a crop. That's a picture of what the church and the world is like. The life of God, the resurrection power of God taking root in the world, showing the world what it one day will be. But it needs the rain. Without the rain, there's a famine because nothing grows. This relies on God. The church is built by God's Spirit. So think about what the roots do. This is to show you that I passed my GCSE biology. Here we go. The roots draw water, nutrients up from the soil. And then you have the stem that supports the plant structure, transports the water up into the center of the plant and keeps everything connected. And then the outcome of roots and the stem is the fruit, the buds, the flowers, in which life goes beyond its own entity. The church always lives for what is beyond itself. And the fruit, the buds, they contain the seeds, the DNA format of the original entity, and can reproduce. And so in church terms, this means that the apostolic leadership that I think we're called to do at this time as the church is to bring extension, multiplication, growth, new things and new ways. This is how we understand the word missionary. You know, it's just a different version of the same word. In Greek, apostolos just means sent, and in Latin, missio means sent. And missionaries are the sent ones, but we're all called to be a missionary church together, to be sent to the other side of the world or to the streets just right outside, sent to each other, sent into this world, to see the kingdom established, new expressions of life. We're a new expression of life. You know, this church was founded 15 years ago as a new expression of church. It's now established and now planting churches. That's life. That's healthy life. Healthy things grow and then they multiply. That extension relies on healthy leadership. But Paul, in his very clear teaching on the apostolic in 2 Corinthians 4, says, 1 Corinthians 4, it says, apostles are servants. The role of leaders is not to be at the top, not to be the fruiting and the budding bit necessarily, but to also play the role of oversight. It's about support and enabling others. Leaders are meant to enable the ministry to happen for you, all that you do in your life and in the streets and around. That's what apostolic leadership is meant to enable, the fruiting and the multiplication of the church. All of this relies, though, on the roots, that the nourishment is right. And the apostolic authority of what true nourishment looks like is built on the resurrection. That there were actual people that saw Jesus live, die, and rose again. And they passed it on, who passed it on, who passed it on to others, who were able to put it into the scriptures and pass it on to us. This is why there's authority in the apostolic, because it's built on the truth of what Jesus did. And so there's always been a role of apostolic leadership in the church to determine what's wrong. Right from the beginning of the book of Acts, you see this, but by the time you get to Acts 15, it's happening on a major scale. They're having to discuss major theological things, and it's the apostles that speak with authority of what's right and what's wrong, and that's what bishops have always done. And it's at this level that I just want to dwell for a moment and say, we are, I think, to expect crazy extension Massive multiplication. In this time, if this is an apostolic moment, what is coming down the line is a crazy multiplication of the church's life in this nation. And that's ultimately what I believe. But for that to happen, we need the right leadership. For that to be in place, we need to keep the roots healthy. And at this critical moment where we stand between a cloud on the horizon and the rain breaking out that will change the whole landscape and create this new devastating multiplying life, we need to guard the roots. We need to be sure and certain that what is feeding the church is healthy. And this is the pineapple moment, by the way. This is the shift that might feel a little bit of, whoa, I like the diagram, but what's going on there? And that's because these moments are contested. And I want to speak into this particular moment. And these times are just so full of outrage and polarization. We are divided by our ideas in this culture and separated by ideology. And whether that's the media companies that have discovered that as well as lust, rage also holds people's attention. And so your broadcast, your enemy on your algorithm, the person that you're automatically against, or whether it's the political parties that are using ever extreme methods to get your vote. In this time, what you are against defines who you are. And of course, this is nothing new. It just feels a bit more intense. But what I want to talk about is the specific rise of the way Christianity is used in our cultural conversation. Because I think some of it is a counterfeit to the true apostolic call of the church at this time. I want to talk about the way Christianity is being increasingly used within conversation around immigration, matters of national identity. So you might be aware of Operation Raise the Colours over the summer. We saw lots of flags erected. I'm sure you've seen them around London, or if you've driven around, all over the nation. And many saying, well, we've just celebrated the Lionesses winning the Euros. This is just a healthy celebration of national life, surely. Then others pointing to the fact that there's something quite intimidating and aggressive and actively dominating about the way this is happening. And those quoted often using actually quite extreme ideas about why they're raising the flag at the exclusion of others. Now, there are many examples of, I think, how Christianity has been drawn into the most extreme elements in this conversation. But I'm just going to give you a couple. This is a mosque in Basildon, the Basildon Islamic Center. My friend who's the bishop of that area sent me this picture. And the graffitis you can see says, Christ is King, done late on Thursday night. So as many Muslims as possible on the way to prayer would see this on the wall. And opposite these words, Jesus, King, Lord, and all these crosses. And then this statement, this is England. Completely conflating and collapsing Christianity and a national identity. And what this is saying is clear. You're not welcome here because you're not Christian and you're not English. And it's the use of vandalism and aggression to intimidate, to isolate. And actually claiming an authority that's spiritual and religious to do so. Just wonder what picture that gives those that call this mosque home of faith. So if you're a Muslim mum bringing your kids past your mosque and you saw that, what does it tell you about Christians in the area? If you're a young man searching for truth, following the religion you've been brought up in, what does this tell you about the Jesus that Christians believe in? Another moment, this is a picture a friend sent me. He took it in Southampton. It's a protest outside a hostel there, a hotel. And you can see on the banner, Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. If you're inside, what does that look like? A couple of days later, a Molotov cocktail, a petrol bomb was thrown through the window. How, if you're inside, are you to distinguish, well, there's some Christians present, and what does it feel like to be on the receiving end of that treatment and then see a banner saying Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life? If you feed the plant wrong ideas, it won't grow healthily and it won't reproduce. If we settle for a counterfeit form of Christianity in this moment, we'll miss the apostolic moment to paint the true cross and the true picture of Jesus on this nation at this time. And I know this is a difficult topic, but we need to talk about this. The march last weekend, Unite the Kingdom, thousands upon thousands present. And let me just say, I've got great friends that were there, actually, both at this part of this, in the United Kingdom March and the counter protest. And if you were there, and if a lot of these ideas are important to you, you're welcome here. And if you listen carefully, not necessarily what your algorithm shows you, in the thousands upon thousands of people there was such variety of reasons and variety of expressions of why people were drawn to protest in this way. And I'm not actually weighing in today on political policy, so listen to what I am saying and not what I'm not saying. There'll be many of the feelings represented, many of the reasons why people march that actually we really should listen to. But what was striking is this general backstory of how Christianity is starting to be picked up in extreme ideas was overwhelming at the march. If you were anywhere near it, you would have just heard the constant shouting, Christ is King. You would have seen crosses and crucifixes. And one journalist that walked around following people, he said he's just everywhere, crusader outfits. People carrying crosses, shouting Jesus, the way, the truth, and the life. Christ is Lord. And a consistent theme emerged that those that were feeling most excluded, the reason to march, was seeing that Christianity was a means to have their expression and their resentments felt and heard. Something really important there. There's also a terrifying truth that there was a call for violence right from the very center of the march, from the stage. That 3 pastors and a praise band were involved, and that Christianity was being adopted and used to mean things that, frankly, I don't think it does. What I fear, as I've said, is in this apostolic moment, if we're not careful, amongst a whole bunch of legitimate concerns and a legitimate clash of ideas, Christianity will be missed. The real thing will be missed because a counterfeit form will be held up. Because if you see the cross through any flag, whatever colors you want to put on it, you don't really see the cross. It must be Jesus first and then any other ideology. It's always been the way, and it's always been the challenge. Can we take the cross on its own means, or do we have to add to it? The cross is not a weapon to divide. It's the power of God's love shown in human history to save, to heal, restore, and unite. And if we're here feeling, well, we agree with that, and if you're feeling smug or superior, then you've not understood the power of the cross for a moment like this. So many of us in this room, I imagine, wouldn't have gone to Unite the Kingdom March. And that distance should actually make us think, okay, right, there is a distance. Well, what will I do and how will I respond? We need to raise up and realize that we, as the church, should demonstrate the true power of the cross, the true meaning of the cross. If you follow, if you listen carefully, so many people that are now shouting Christ is King, if you interview them, if you listen to the stories, they don't really know what they're saying. If you ask me, what does the cross represent? People are being fed. We're fighting against immigration. We're trying to rescue our nation. We need to speak clearly on the truth of what the cross means. The cross alone shows us God's love. And we live in a moment where politics has become God and God has become politics, and we need to show the opposite. Offering a political and social answer that isn't enough won't do for this moment. The attention economy has created enemies for each of us. Yeah, my enemy is the woke liberal elite or far-right hooligans. These referendum ways of speaking are not helpful in building true community based on the love of God at the cross. I want to give you the cross where everyone is welcome. Show you the love of God that makes friends out of enemies. The cross of Christ that can overcome every division will not be limited by any singular country or any political agenda, because Christ alone is King of the whole world. All hail King Jesus, we sang. It's a place where our violence goes in and love comes out. The way of the cross is not power, but powerlessness. Power rendered weak in love, where God himself died to overcome death. And I feel that this counterfeit energy wants to take all the spiritual yearning and all the spiritual interest of this moment where a cloud is gathered on the horizon, and distract us in the opposite direction. towards politics and power. Remember, this is graffiti found in a Roman villa from the 1st or 2nd century. And this is it kind of sketched out. It says Alexmenos worships his God, and it seems to be some kind of like slamming of one servant against another. So some guy is working with someone called Alexmenos, and he draws this picture, and it's meant to hate on Alexmenos. And it says, you know that guy Alexmenos? He's become a Christian. What an idiot. So he's drawn his God as a donkey on a cross. And what he's saying is, how ridiculous would you have to be to worship a God who died on a cross? How ridicule-worthy, how shaming to be so stupid that a form of execution, something like, you think God would die on a cross? This is where the power lies. Because the true cross is the end of all hostility and hate. For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwelling in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. For he himself is our peace, who has made for the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, the dividing wall of hostility, by setting aside in his flesh the law with its commands and regulations. His purpose was creating himself one new humanity out of the two, thus making peace, and in one body to reconcile both of them to God through the cross, by which he put to death their hostility. This is where violence ends and love begins. The Cartesian order have this motto: the cross is steady while the world turns. And so as we close, my encouragement for you is that we stand firm in the power of the cross. Let me give you one picture of what that looks like. Last week, there was an incident outside of this building during the 11:30 service where a woman full of probably quite a lot of intoxicating substances and really in a not good state mentally, saying all kinds of violent and rageful things, started attacking people, and it was quite dangerous and quite scary. And she was really small, actually. She was about this tall, but I was scared because there was such a rage within her that it overcame her physicality and somehow became bigger than her body. She was generally terrifying. And there was a point where she was attacking different people, trying to help them, protect them, bring them into the king's house. She attacked a man who tried to hit her back. So me and a man called James Venville were just trying to like block her, both protect her from people and people from her. And there was this moment where James, that you might know, who's quite a tall chap about this big, just put out his arms like this. And he just stood for a moment between her and people and her. And as all these moments are, it was both deeply disturbing and tragic and also slightly funny. Because James is this tall and she was this big. And there was a whole period of time where she was trying to punch him in the face and she couldn't reach. So she just kept on missing. I spoke to James afterwards, like, are you aware of what you did? And it's like, yeah, it just felt right. And what we saw was rage overcoming one woman's physicality, like beyond her physical ability. And then one incredible, patient, kind, incredible man with a very big, powerful body, choosing the path of love, choosing his strength to protect. And that's a picture of, I think, not just like an analogy, but a prophetic picture of us as a church, of what we must be in this time. The cross is strong. This is God. But it's that strength rendered perfect in love that can stand in the midst of rage and protect. We're to stand firm in the power of the cross. Secondly, we're to pray for the rain. This is my urgent kind of call for this time, that we don't panic. We stand firm. We don't try and be too proactive and run around fixing everything and exhaust ourselves. We don't sit down and let it happen. We stand firm in the power of the cross, the truth of who Jesus is. Pray for the rain. Pray for the rain. As a church, if we're not praying at this point, then we really need to start. We need God to do what only God can do. So we stand firm in the power of the cross and pray for the rain. Would you stand? Sam's going to join me and we're going to pray corporately. I'm not going to invite anyone forward. We're going to respond together. This is a moment to pray for our nation. We need God to move. But first, let's just acknowledge our own lives before the cross. Acknowledge our own need for grace. Maybe all of this is new to you, and in prayer you can come to Jesus through the cross. It's a place of welcome and embrace. It's a place where your sin and your hate and your fear can go, and out can come love and peace and acceptance. One of the reasons why I most wanted to share this message was hearing how many people in this church felt afraid last weekend. Walking around London, they felt, for the first time, some people afraid. I want to invite you as we pray now to bring your fear to the cross, to find God's protection and his safety. And lastly, others of you like me, there have been moments this summer where I've been livid. If you go down the deep, dark end of the internet, there are people using the name of Jesus and the cross in a way that is disgusting and vile. What do you do with that anger? You just bring it to the cross and find a better way in love. So Jesus, we invite your Spirit now to come and to meet us. And before we pray for our nation and pray for your Spirit to come, for the rain to fall, we bring ourselves to the cross. We need your grace and your love. We're all equal at the cross. This is where there are no enemies, but only friends. Where we are forgiven and we forgive. We stand at the cross. And we bring you our own fear, the own ways in which we've been wronged and we've been isolated. We come to the cross. Give us your love. Empower us. Just the bold thing is, just if you're around, you just love prayer. If you felt afraid at these times and you just want to be held really by the love of God, just love you to raise a hand just lightly. And if you're around someone with a raised hand, just lay a hand on their shoulder. Well, I pray that you would hold us now. You take away fear. Give us boldness in our dependence on you and our confidence in the power of your cross. Come, Holy Spirit.